Wow. There was so much in that, Bettina, that just really blew my mind and opened my mind, that I had never really even thought about. What you spoke about with regards to the flexibility of the story, and the creation of the story space that exists outside of present time, and how our brains are actually wired as human beings, and the role that language plays in transporting and connecting to imagine, like our ability to imagine, is what sets us apart as a species, we believe. And then how, associating the character with ourselves at a subconscious level. So you're hearing the story and you're going, oh, it's just this lovely fairy folktale, but you're automatically, in your conditioning, in your subconscious mind, actually relating to the character and the setting and the circumstances, and going, oh, and you're resonating, and then you're telling yourself a story. And then the beautiful thing that you uncovered for me right at the end there was, I get to choose my own adventure. I get to change the ending if I need to. And that, and I'm not surprised that you had, people coming up to you just wanting to share their story, because, it automatically starts that process, and it's such a primal, human process to sort of, think that way. I had never...
It's a problem-solving technique.
Yeah.
Storytelling is, and we hear something, whether it's a child coming home from school and saying, oh, guess what happened in the playground at lunchtime? And this happened, and then he did this, and then she said that, and that, and that, and that. It's actually resolving, it's going through the characters and what happened and how that happened and what was the outcome. It's a problem-solving, human problem-solving technique.
Yeah. And
I would never have thought about it like that before until you explained it, Bettina, at all. It was opened my mind so much.
Wasn't it, Bec? I know, I'm sitting on me just going, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. My mouth dropped quite a lot of times in that conversation. Yeah.
So good, so rich. And just from a practical standpoint, you think about, I know, Bec, for you in your work, the many contexts that we find ourselves in as, mothers, daughters, wives, aunties, uncles, all of those roles that we play as human beings. And I'm in sales and marketing in my professional life, and when I think about what I do all day every day, it's actually storytelling. It's talking about an experience that a client had, or how we helped someone out, or just the power of story is really incredible. And in the context of mental health, it's taken on a whole deeper richness for me, just out of how you've explained it. Thank you.
So much so, especially I can put it into when my participants share about their own journey or what got them to be where they are. You've just opened my mind. I was like, whoa, it's really it was amazing to hear a different perspective, and it was just, fabulous.
And how to apply it as a strategy. That's probably the biggest thing.
Much, yes.
Being able to apply storytelling as a strategy, and using metaphor and fairy tale and imagining as a way of disarming what can be sometimes a really confronting, very difficult reality to face. And, if you transport into metaphor and you tell the same situation context, but talking about a character that's not them, but then have that person be able to relate, and then see how the character problem solves. That's the powerful bit. It's the removal of self into the metaphorical world that then makes the problem solving possible. Because when you're in your own head and you're in your own mind, it's almost impossible
to get
out of it. Yeah, exactly. And the thinking that created the problem is the same thinking that's trying to solve it, and it's really, really difficult. But when you transcend that and you go into metaphor, all of a sudden you have access to all this possibility, the creativity, you can negotiate, there's flexibility. Well, what if it was this perspective? What if it was that? All of a sudden you have every option at your disposal. Whereas when you're in your own mind, in your own world, in your own circumstances, you've got no choices, no options, and you feel trapped. Whereas when you're in the world of story, you can do anything. And that's
so effectively, like I've worked with young people in detention centres, and they just, there's not the risk. There's not the risk of the vulnerability of their, the other young people in the centre. There's not the opportunity that they're going to be pounced on afterwards and given a really hard time for exposing some enormous vulnerability, because they can have it in metaphor. They can make it as bizarre and crazy. They can pull in gaming characters. Most gaming characters come from myth or legend anyway. Yeah. They can pull in all of these things, create the story, look like a great hero, and at the same time have been actually articulating their own story. There's a saying that storytellers have, which is mouth open, story jump out. And it's so true. After a while, like, listen to your children's stories. It's incredible. Mouth open, story jump out. It's incredible. It happens all the time. And for us that are the tellers, like, even regardless of what your workplace is, marketing, wherever you might work, you are the teller. And once you realise that as the teller, you are actually the director of that process, just as much as the way you're working now. You're looking at creative options. You're listening to what's happened and you're changing and saying, this is what we can do with it. You are the teller. You're the teller as that's happening. And in your family, you're the teller. You can actually offer all these opportunities. And it's just remarkable. It is. It's absolutely. And that's what storytellers have done since the beginning of time in all of those different cultures. The story, they take what's happening in their community or in their village, they listen to the issues, they weave it into metaphor and they feed it back. And then it will start to work, because one person tells another, tells another, tells another, they talk about it and they come up with a way to move forward. That's moving them out of the stuck place. And that's just what storytellers have done since the beginning of time. Yeah.
That's certainly the positive side of it, and I feel like there's absolutely the flip side as well. You know, you hear people telling negative story and talking about, difficulty, or there's gossip, or that sort of stuff is where that same gift of storytelling has the same ability to destroy communities as it does to build them up. Yeah. If it's used in an unwise way, you can create rumor, and I feel like that's what sometimes happens for ourselves when that voice inside of our head gets on a negative spiral and it starts telling that destructive story, and then you tell it long enough and you start to believe it like it's real. Have you had an experience, or what would be your advice for someone who's in that situation where they're hearing negative story, or they're in an environment or surrounded by people that have a reoccurring story about them that is ultimately tearing them down? Like, how do we interrupt that kind of negative story and inject positive, and use this same technique to turn that around?
Yeah. Well, I think that if you look at the media as a storyteller, which it is, and how they can just pick up and do a negative story, a negative story, a negative story, and it's the loudest story. It's the story that everyone is hearing. The other thing is politicians do exactly the same thing. Who are the most influential storytellers? Politicians and journalists. And how compromised their integrity is at all times. So how do you turn that around? You make it work on a local level. That's all you can do. You actually, gossip is a really good example. When there is, well, what Chris said earlier, the fact that Deception Bay has had a very bad reputation, and lots of words like Depression Bay and Conception Bay, those sorts of terms. It's still an incredibly beautiful waterfront, but it's the only waterfront that's affordable, because there's still a lot of people that don't want to come and live here. How do you turn that around? Well, all you can do is, just like with your own self, is you start on the smallest and the most local level. So you work with your own community. And by that, I guess that, the most obvious example I can give is the example of working in Deception Bay and the work that I've done as both a storyteller and as a librarian, children's librarian, working with parents and language. So things that you might think are just for fun, like a rhyme time program that you have out in the park or in the library with babies. They're amazing. What that does is make children, parents confident with language. And when you're confident with language, you then are able to articulate no says no, my body belongs to me, until you are actually able to take that story and take language and make it your own. Then that's very difficult to renegotiate. And language is the way we navigate the world. And if you're not confident with language, then, so yeah, you can't change the media. I can't change Trump. What I can do is do a rhyme time session in a park so that parents who feel are lacking confidence with their ability to communicate with their child get to sit there. They just do basics like rhymes, songs, lullabies in a group until they see how their child's face lights up and comes alive from the closeness, but also from that love of nonsense words, blah, 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 la, 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 you know, all those crazy words, so that language and playing with language is fun. Playing and play, it's actually connection and attachment, but it's fun. And when you have that from the time you're a small baby, even in a community where there's many different, English may not be the first language of a lot of people, and there's a lot of people whose literacy skills are very low. Start there, start when they're babies and they're new parents, because that is when they actually get to see the delight of their child connecting with them through words and language. And so the next step is when they say, what was it like when you were little, mummy? Then you can actually say, well, you might have a lot of negative stories about what it's like when you were little, but what you can do is you can find the words and find the joy and actually tell those stories. And it also means that when you do actually tell the stories, like, yeah, I remember being pushed over in the playground too, and it was really tough. Well, when you tell those stories to your child, then you've actually got them in the context of a relationship, which is like your own personal story space, and it's something that's negotiable again. And it's a whole toolbox that you have in working with language. And when you, when you work with young people, when you work with, you know, it's there. It's a toolbox. It's the easiest and it's the oldest, and it's not the easiest. I take that back. Of course, it's extremely skilled work, but on a family level, and what you do just in the context of the delight with you and your grandma, or you and your child, you and your partner, it's the way you relate. It just adds another, because it's the delight in language and the confidence in language that is able to say, this is who I am and this is where I stand in the world. And so, yeah, you can't change the big picture, but if you change enough, and I've seen it in Deception Bay, it's amazing. When I was back here working in, say, 2007, 2008, I know we're going to run out of time, I'm sorry, 2007, 2008, to see those children that were in playgroups then who are now teenagers and older, and to see those families and how they are now flooding the Deception Bay Library. There's lots of them there. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have the issues that families have. Of course they do, but they've got a bigger repertoire to deal with it. And it doesn't mean that things don't go wrong because there's no happily ever after, but it does mean that at least you've got a bit of a toolbox, and that's all you can have. And you can have some confidence with language to actually be able to articulate what it is that is happening and think of different ways for the story to unfold. Yeah.
Love it. That's awesome. That's a great spot to leave it on this particular topic, do you think? Thank you so much.
And our little Deception Bay Library, one of the things I love about that is that they often say it's actually owned by the people of Deception Bay. It's not just part of the Moreton Bay, you know, regional shire kind of collection of assets and what have you. You've never seen so many young mums and dads and families and grands all go down to our little library. It's a wonderful resource, and it's a beautiful connection for people in community. And I guess, Bettina, you know, the most significant part of the storyteller is the conversations that are encouraged when people do feel vulnerable enough, you know, to ask people too how they're going. You know, sometimes it's not always easy to get that first part of the conversation going, but, you know, you have a safe place, you can yarn it up, you can listen, and you can start to explore what some of those possible options might be down the track. Yeah. Awesome. Well done.